What are we devoted to? That's really what I'm coming back to. Because what we're devoted to is what we have devotion for. But that is the beginning. And that's why devotion is the next best thing. Of course, it's usually meant slightly differently. It's talking about awakening the heart. But what awakens the heart? It's what we're devoted to. If you fall in love in that wonderful romantic way that God has planted in our hearts, and you've just begun to discover the possibilities of really expanding your sense of definition to include more than just your own reality, there is no effort involved to think about the person that you're devoted to. I referenced this morning a friend of mine who had 2 sons, and he was a little bit later in life, maybe his late 30s. Maybe I'm not even sure exactly when his sons were born. But he'd been a devotee for 15 years or more, a devotee of this path and so on. And he said about himself, I thought I was a pretty selfless guy. And he was a pretty selfless guy. He said, but I had no idea until my son was born. He said, and then I realized that selfless love means there's no self. There's just no concern about self. Total 100%. Everything is for the child. And he jokingly said, as often people who aren't parents, I've never had children in this life, but I've had so many lives of having children that it's very, very familiar to me. But he resolved, of course, that he would never be one of those foolish, embarrassing kinds of fathers who played the idiot just to please their child. He said instantly, all self-concern, all sense of embarrassment. He just became just like every other doting parent. You'll just do anything. You'll put on the elephant costume and walk down the middle of the street if it pleases your child. Why not? Because there's no self. You're just devoted to this role. You're devoted to this being. And it becomes effortless. And there's been a lot of discussion here about effort versus grace. And this is where devotion plays its part. Because when you're just spontaneously and naturally that way, and that's why the image of a child is always there. YouTube puts out all these ridiculous little videos, and it's the sort of drug of choice when the brain is really tired, is to just watch little dogs playing with babies, In the privacy of our own homes, all of us watch little dogs playing with babies, I mean, everybody's nodding, but I won't identify you. We all know. And one of them that crossed my path was just, how do people get pictures of these things? But the toddler has wandered over and misidentified a different adult as their own parent, And so the toddler's just, reaching up, taking the hand, and if it's a nice adult that they've stumbled into, and usually the adult can't resist, and so the child, with complete trust, complete open-heartedness, is holding on to the hand, is grabbing the leg, and then there'll be the moment where they suddenly realize this is the wrong one, and usually the parent is the one filming it, so they're right, there's no harm done. But that innocent trust that just walks over and expects this to happen. That's why God gives us effortless love at sometimes. All that I was talking about, romantic love, parental love, or passion for creativity. And that's one of the reasons why creativity is also a divine quality. That our individuality and the energy that flows through us is God-given. And the intention is to transcend it. And to transcend it, suppression does not lead to transcendence. In Kali Yuga, the way that you tried to get over the ego was by crushing it. But all that did was just drive it underground, and all that did was take away the individuality that's given to us. The path of self-realization is transcendence by spiritualizing what you do. And by that, I mean making it not just a product of what I want, but what is trying to happen, what is flowing through me, what God wants to do, how he wants to use me as an instrument. And any of you who do creative work, and it doesn't matter whether your work is museum quality or not, that's not the issue. when you become relaxed enough to allow the energy to flow through you, and your work becomes original because it comes from your point of origin, what happens is you forget yourself. Just as we've been talking these last few days, that self-realization is not the perfection of this personality, it's the fact that you no longer even identify with it. That you carry it around because you have to know which body you're supposed to move, and you have to know whether you've eaten or not, and a few things like that. And creative work, if we do it with that kind of consciousness, is that you just find yourself to be a flow of energy. And see, what's so wonderful about that is when you're in a flow of energy, nothing's changed. You're still the same person, but you're not thinking about it anymore. What takes us away, as Isha Das was reminding us, is God is present right now. Time is an illusion. We have nothing that we really have to acquire that we don't already have. Our attention is elsewhere. So what are we devoted to? Are we devoted to making this little nest perfect? And just always, is that our point of devotion, or is what we're devoted to is to the divine within us and to being instruments of that divine? What is the single most important thing to me? And you have to make that honest. You can't just give the answer that you think is the right one for the test, because it won't, nobody's fooled. Just nobody's fooled. Little children, just will say the most outrageous lies. They're sitting there with chocolate all over their face. Who ate the chocolate cake? No, Mommy, I didn't. You're just covered with chocolate cake. And somehow you think that's going to work. Children are constantly representing to us our own delusions, but they're so adorable, you don't get upset with them, you just think they're adorable. And truthfully, God thinks we're just as adorable. I have this picture of the equivalent of astral Starbucks, where all the masters are sitting around drinking coffee, telling outrageous stories about things their disciples have done. Can you believe it? I mean, can't you see it, really? I mean, we're so comical, and we are their children, and they just think we're adorable. They presented to me that this is what they really believed. And they actually expected me to believe it. That's what they say to each other. So we have to, this is where sincerity comes in. I talked about that before too. Swami telling me sincerity is everything. In that authenticity, that's just being who I am. And you see what's so perfect here, in just, again, the children analogy is there, is that God made me this way. And if I'm going to be different, he has to change me. This is not working for either of us, sir. Let's see if we can straighten this out. So what are we devoted to? We're devoted to learning. We're devoting to honesty. But you see, here's where courage comes in. Because we have to expose ourselves. It's just, and we spend so much of our lives protecting ourselves. I spent decades, I had no idea that I was doing it. Swami Kriyananda always knew. I mean, that's one of the ways that he was so powerful to me, is that he just always knew. But it comes to you whether you have the physical contact or not. Once you desire that clarity, once you really decide, I'm just tired of pretending, and I'm going to risk. I'm just going to risk letting down, just not having to justify myself, just happily being wrong. If I'm wrong, Sri Yukteswar gives advice for how to get along with people. Sometimes people will say to me, I've just started on the spiritual path and my family thinks it's crazy, and they're always telling me that, that I'm wrong, or they know I believe in reincarnation. They ask me to explain it and tell them what Kriya is, and I say, for heaven's sakes, you have no capacity to explain it. Don't even try. And when you try to explain it, it sounds ridiculous to them. You just dig yourself a big hole. What Sri Yukteswar said that you should say is, perhaps you're right. Which is, think about it, conceded nothing, absolutely nothing. But perhaps they're right, who knows? It's just like, I don't have to defend myself. That's really what he's saying. Well, perhaps you're right. Thank you for telling me. I'll keep it in mind. You know, maybe I am deluded. I'll find out, and then I can always come back, and then you can say that you were right and I was wrong. I mean, why don't we say things like that in an easy, relaxed way? What are we afraid of? This is where courage comes from. But also, this is the practice of introspection, which is so important. What is really important to me? I've mentioned several times these near-death experiences, these interesting ones that have come to me. It's made me think about it a lot. I also mentioned briefly yesterday about start your life review before you're on the other side. And if for any of you who are engaged with people who are dying, or let me say it differently, who know what their expiration date is or know that it's coming sooner. I mean, all of us are engaged in the process of dying, but perhaps not so obviously yet. But one of the things you can really do is start the life review. You know, what do you feel about this? What do you remember? I had the opportunity to be with this woman named Paula. I was one of a crowd. She was amazing. She had cancer 3 times. I don't think she was 50 before she died. I think she was in her 40s. She had cancer 3 times. She never took chemotherapy. It came back the 3rd time, and she knew it was over for her. Her oncologist, she was such a dear soul, her oncologist felt so bad that she was dying. He tried to treat her, but she hadn't taken the treatment. She was so generous-hearted, she felt so bad for the doctor. She called the doctor in and just sort of so sweetly, she, you know, it's not your fault. And then in a very folksy way, she said, I'm just not a chemo kind of gal. Which was irresistible. So she knew that she was dying because there was just nothing more that they could do, and there were all the signs of it. And so she went into the hospital because they had room service. It was better than being at home. And the hospital, the local hospital near Nevada City, they basically just turned over these several rooms, and there were like 20 of us, and we were with her for like 3 days. We called it Paula's passing party. We were all just there, and she was just waiting to die, and she knew she was going to die. There was one other piece. What was that I was going to say? I can't remember. It'll come back to me. But what she did is she started just thinking about every single bit of unfinished business that there still was. And she either asked people to come and see her, or she would call them on the phone if she couldn't. She was married, and her husband's family was nearby, but the family was not in tune with her spiritually. But she had them come, and she talked to them. And then in the sweetest possible way, she said, "So it's so nice that you came. I'm so glad I had a chance to say goodbye to you. Now I just need to be with my spiritual family." And without it all hurting their feelings, she just sent them away, because she really wanted that with her. And there was this one woman that they'd had a very bad experience because Paula had been her boss, and the woman had been so difficult and impossible for so many reasons that Paula had to fire her. I mean, this is all within the Ananda family, and the thing about a spiritual family, well, I should only say good things about a spiritual family, but I'm going to add this. It's worse. It's much worse than marriage. Because marriage ends when you die, but your spiritual family doesn't. Okay? So there's no escaping it. It's just forever. And in our communities, we even live together, even after we wish we weren't. Okay? So that she had this very bad experience with this woman and had to fire her, and the woman remained angry, never really understood that she deserved to be fired. So it was when she went over thought of her life, this stood out as a dissonant point. And the woman was far away and couldn't come. This is the sign of a telephone to those of us of a certain age, right? I commented about this because I was saying we talked on the phone, and I said, why do we do that? That doesn't mean anything anymore. I talked on the phone like that. Or I talked on the phone, I just talked on the phone. I'm wandering around talking to myself. So this young man in the room who was like 30, he had to ask some elderly person, why would this be the sound of the phone? Anyway, she called her on the phone, and she said, I've always felt badly about what happened between us. And then she said in her folksy way, I think we're both big enough gals to just put it behind us. Don't you think so? Now, the magic of that was she never apologized for something she didn't owe an apology for. It was absolutely true, because what she was devoted to was truth. What is the point of our devotion? It wasn't just to please people. It wasn't just to make everything nice. It was to be absolutely true. That was the most important part. I remembered what I forgot. When Paula went into the hospital, I was distant. I was on a holiday. I think I was in Costa Rica. Anyway, at that time I could do things like that, so I was in Costa Rica, and then I lived in Palo Alto. She lived in Nevada City, and when we somehow got back into the U.S., we had to find out where she was, and we had to find out whether she was still alive. This was before such easy communication. Her brother was with her, so we made some calls, and we finally got him on the phone, and he said, "Oh, Asha, Paula's been dying to see you." Then the whole room, I could hear, erupts in laughter. And then he says, no, Paula's been not dying to see you. But you see how marvelous that is? I mean, that's how we want to be, which is, okay, I'm leaving behind a lot, but this is who we are. This is where we're going. It's so beautiful. I'll finish just because the end of her life was amazing. At the very end, she was on a lot of morphine, so she was a little out there sometimes. The nurses came to me and said they were very concerned because she hadn't passed any urine, to say it delicately, for a long time. And, they didn't quite know what to do. So I said, Paula, they're concerned because you haven't peed. And she looked at me like this. She said, oh, I hope to die before I ever have to pee again. And I said, it's that painful? Oh, yes, she said, like that. But you see, that's where we want. How do you get that way? What are you devoted to? That's really the question. She was devoted to God's will. She was devoted to truth. And she was just determined to live that. She had this attachment to coffee. And of course, everybody, when you get cancer, tells you what you should and shouldn't do. So everybody told her that she should stop drinking coffee, but she never could stop drinking coffee, or never wanted to. And so one friend, Paula, would you like a cup of coffee? This is her last 20 hours of life. Yes. She couldn't take any food, so he brought the coffee to her like this, and from Starbucks or wherever, like this. She had a swab. She would put a swab in it, and she would, taste the coffee like this. So Paula's fading. She's beginning to fade out. She's like, it's been a while since she's spoken. She's just sitting like this. So he starts to take the coffee cup out of her hand. She closes her hand. She closes her hand on the coffee and says, I'm not done yet. And then she takes one more swab and she gives it away. But wouldn't you like to just be that free at the end? How do you get there? By what are you devoted to? She was devoted to her husband. She was devoted to Ananda. She was devoted to Master. But she was devoted to that which was true. She was devoted to divine reality in all its aspects. At some point right there at the end, because these were her last words, she said, God, Christ, Guru. And she never spoke again. This was a gal, just a really sweet, beautiful lady like everybody else. But she was devoted. That's what devotion really is. You don't have to sing and dance to show it. It just has to be in the silence of the night. Where does my heart go? Where does my heart turn? And it's not something that's just given to you, it's something that you train. When I feel restless, how do I solve the problem? When I feel lonely, how do I solve the problem? When I'm in the last days of my life, what is really important to me? And today and tomorrow, when you make decisions, it's very simple. How do I spend my time? How do I spend my money? What do I think about? What do I talk about? What does my house look like? You know, like, who am I? Just look around and imagine if a stranger comes in. What would they think you were devoted to? If you're being watched from the outside, what would they think was the most important thing in your life? And if it doesn't match your aspirations, then start inching it toward it. You know, nature doesn't make sudden leaps. You can't do it all at once. I've watched over the years something that I've come to call people practicing Boing-back yoga. That's the gospel according to Asha. You just throw yourself out way farther than you can go, you know, and just give up everything and throw away all your wardrobe and just dressed in white and walk around always pious and carry a little prayer book. Be sincere. If you're really devoted to whatever your local sports team is, you're just devoted to them. You know, what can you do? It's part of it, but you can work to make it different. And then you look at your life and you say, well, what's unresolved? What can I do? Because I'm 78 3/4 now. It's a very, very interesting exercise when you kind of relax your mind and just say, what still bothers me? If I'm on my deathbed like Paula, who am I going to have to call? What am I going to have to rectify? What am I going to have a last taste of before I'm done with it? And it's really interesting to see what comes up. You know, I try to stay current now. I'm very careful. But I'll give you one example. When I was in college, I became interested in this man, and I couldn't get his attention. So I befriended his roommate in order to get to him. And at one horrible moment, I realized that the roommate thought I was interested in him. And then there was this horrible moment when he realized I was just using him. You know, that's what shows up in your life review, I promise you, is like when you just hurt someone deliberately to get something for yourself, like that. And I can still, he's long gone, I can't even remember his name, but just like, oh my, this is not good. And you know, when you have your life review, age is no excuse. If you did it when you were 5, it's still your karma to have done it. Now, of course, God is merciful. You can release these things. But pay attention. What are you devoted to? Are you devoted to protecting yourself and just imagining you're going to get away with it? I mean, get real. I mean, that's the beginning of freedom. It's like, so what? If it's true, it's true. This is why I keep coming back to life review, because at that point it's all over. But also, God not only loves us, God likes us. He likes us. We're his own. You know, your baby can be impossible. And one woman who ended up with 5 children, at that time she only had 3. I've told you, I've never had children. My friend also, when their family went from 2 to 3, he said, when there are 2 of them, we could play man-to-man defense. Now we have to go to a zone defense because we're outnumbered. He said 3 is way more than 2 because you're outnumbered now. So she had 3 at that point, and 3, they were just wearing her out. And she said she lay on the couch and just said to God, not to God, she said to the room, one of them has to go. And of course she didn't really mean it, but that was just like, you know, this is too much. But we are what we are, and he loves us. Of course he's not going to get rid of one of her children. She had 2 more after that. God's never going to get rid of us. You see how where God is really trying to take us? You know, it's to the point of complete relaxation. What you see is what you get. He sees us completely. It's what he has. You don't like it, sir? Then give me the grace to be different. That's just all there is to it. That's devotion. And then it naturally comes out in song and dance and art and all of that. But that helps us to cultivate it. This is who I am. But it starts with just, this is who I am. And that's the secret of everything. Okay?